G'day guys, it's James Smith, aka the Tattoo Butcher, and today we're going to be covering off how to prepare a pork shoulder for pulled pork. Alrighty guys, most importantly today we're going to need a New Zealand pork shoulder. When you're shopping in your supermarket or local butchery, make sure you look for that New Zealand pork sticker and support local farmers. Also, we're going to need something nice and sharp to cut up that pork shoulder, so I'm using a 5-inch Victory boning knife today. I like to use a smaller boning knife or a smaller knife just to get into those fine little bones and trim that skin and fat off that we're going to need to do today. We're using a butt end of the shoulder. This one has the rib bones in and the neck bones still in it. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to remove those. Also, if we flip it over, we've still got the skin on, okay? So we're going to remove the skin today, also removing the fat, which we'll touch on soon why we want to remove that fat. First things first, we're actually just going to remove the rib bones and the neck bones, okay? So we want to do this really clean. So just down the inside here, we have a bit of meat sitting in here, and what I like to do is trim all this out before I actually remove it. So, tip of the knife, and just getting in that nice little groove. Might only be a little bit of meat, but all this meat comes in really handy if we're gonna make sausages or make any pork minces afterwards. Next thing, we're just gonna flip it on its side, because we just want to remove these rib bones. So to remove these rib bones, it makes it a lot easier if we can actually push our knife just down the side here. So I like to go on what's called a dagger grip. More than happy to go in this grip. Again, it's down to preference. Dagger grip is just something you kind of pick up as a butcher along the ears and makes life a little bit easier. So as you can see, I've made the cuts, and what I like to do is start to push that bone away from the meat, okay? What we want to do and what we don't want to do is actually not cut into the meat. So pushing that bone away makes it a lot easier for a cleaner removal of that bone. Cool. So we've kind of got down the side of our rib bones now, and we've started on our neck bone. What we want to be careful of is actually going into this dip. We want to make sure that we stay hard on the bone and then kind of come flat down and just get those last little rib bones out. Awesome, so that's our bone removed. So we've got our neck and we've got those rib bones left in. Before we move on and actually check for any little leftover bones, we're just gonna come along and just trim any little excess bits of meat. So once we've trimmed up our bone, got all that excess of meat out of it, basically what we wanna do now is just feel around the pork, okay? So we wanna make sure that none of those little pieces of bone are still left inside of it, okay? Because they are quite deceptive, some of those rib bones and some of those little flaky bits of the neck. So we just check. There is a couple, so there's a little piece here. Again, just going through. If we're trimming out for pulled pork, that's the last thing that we want in our pulled pork, someone to chew on one of those pieces. Cool, so once we've checked for those loose little bones, we're gonna start to trim any heavy fat from the underside. I like to trim the fat from my pork shoulders when doing pulled pork, because when I put that rub on, it really soaks into the meat. If we leave that fat and connective tissue in, it's basically just gonna mean the rub's gonna stick to it and it's not really gonna soak into the meat. So I know a lot of people like to leave the fat on, but I personally like to take it off. Again, it's a personal preference, but that's my reasoning behind taking the fat off. I basically like to seam this little cap out here. We don't seam it all the way. So we've actually got our money muscle that sits in here. We're just gonna seam this little cap just off. If you see it, you can start actually pulling it away a bit there. And we have our scapular bone that sits under that. We're not gonna pull it all the way back, but we have a little vein in here, and we have some heavy connective tissue that we want to take out. The reason behind taking this out is it does get a little bit chewy, and again, when we're doing our pulled pork, we want it to be super tender, super tasty, and we don't want any of that chewiness in there. Cool, so once we've trimmed that, again, we're just going to come back to the top and we're just going to take off any of these heavy bits of fat, again, and connective tissue that sit in there. Again, by removing these fats, we're not losing flavour. A pork shoulder is a heavily used muscle, so it's got really nice bits of intramuscular fat inside of it, and that's overall what's going to make it more tender. So we're not actually losing any of that good kind of outside fat. We've still got the nice fat inside of it. It's going to make it nice and juicy and pull apart. So once we've trimmed the underside, you can basically, what we need to do now is remove the skin, okay? So if we're trying to do pulled pork, we can't leave the skin on, otherwise it's not gonna pull apart. It's quite rubbery, it doesn't break down like the other fats. So, top tip, there's a couple of ways that we can do this. we can actually just trim over the top and trim that off and just go into the fat. I personally like to lay it flat. Like I said, I'm removing the fat anyway, so I lay it flat and actually make a mark and just kind of work my way over it, and I actually get it out in one piece rather than trimming out little pieces. Again, if you feel more comfortable trimming it off just off the top side, that's more than fine. But like I said, I like to lay it down flat, upside down with that fat cap on the block, and just kind of trim along it. And as I do this, I'm peeling the pork shoulder back. So I'm not cutting into any of the meat, I'm just pointing the blade down and cutting into that fat. Spin it around and finish it off on this side. Sweet, so now that we've taken our skin off, we're just gonna go do the same thing as what we did on the underside, and we're just gonna trim those little pieces of fat off before we put our rub on. So once our pork butt's all trimmed out, we're basically ready to rub it. Now, easiest thing to do right now is put it in a tinfoil tray, rather than making a mess on your bench. Get our rub today. I'm using the Tattoo Butcher all-purpose rub. Goes really good on pork. And then basically we're just gonna put a heavy sprinkle of it on. We wanna cover all sides. Also, I don't like to use a binder. I basically put my rub on, leave it sitting on the bench for half an hour, and then all the juices from the meat actually come up and actually help that rub stick to it. Once we've rubbed our pork butt, it's basically ready to cook. So we're gonna cook it open for the first 4 hours at 150 degrees Celsius. Then we're gonna pull it out and add our barbecue sauce, which we're gonna get to soon. Awesome, so I've pulled our pork out now after cooking for 4 hours at 150 degrees Celsius. Now we're ready to wrap it and add our barbecue sauce. So today's barbecue sauce, I've got 2 cups of barbecue sauce, 1 cup of pineapple juice, 1/4 cup of brown sugar, 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of cracked pepper, 1 teaspoon of salt, and half a teaspoon of cayenne pepper. Mix that all together in a pot, heat on a low temperature, and stir it for a good 5 to 10 minutes, and then let it sit. Now when we make this sauce too, guys, we want to make sure that we're only using half of it in this process, because what we're going to do is we're going to save the other half once we pull the pork and mix it through. Awesome, so our pulled pork has come out of the barbecue now. It's ready to go. What we're gonna do though is we're just gonna rest it for an hour, just so temp comes down a little bit and the muscle starts to relax, so that meat just pulls apart. Sweet, now we're ready to serve it up inside our nice tasty burgers. Awesome guys, so that's a wrap on how to trim our New Zealand pork butt, also cook it and make some damn tasty burgers. So I'm about to go smash 3 of these. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure you guys head over to New Zealand Pork's website to go check out more recipes like this.